Joined now by Martin Biron to talk about this 6-1 loss in Game 7 by the Toronto Maple Leafs. And Marty, you and I were talking about it off camera. It's almost like you can't even believe that the same score in Game 7 was the same score in Game 5. Like, it's literally torturing the fan base. The Panthers just dominated Game 7, didn't they?
They dominated from the get-go. Look, in the first 6.5 minutes of the first period, the shot attempts were 21-0. The Leafs didn't even attempted one shot on goal, and Florida had 21. And then they do the same thing at the beginning of the second period. It's 13-1, the shots on goal in the second period with 6.5 minutes left in that period. And when you look at the Leafs, they gave up 2 shots to Florida in the first period in Game 6. So it was a complete change of the way that it was in Game 6, which was successful, to now Game 7. Look at how aggressive the defense, or should I say Seth Jones, because Seth Jones was all over the ice, and how aggressive they were. They basically said, Florida, we're going to go down swinging, and if we're going to go down, we're just going to be aggressive. Well, it wasn't that case. They were on pucks in the neutral zone at the blue line all the time. And look, I'm going to give Seth Jones some credit here. Like, he was traded and brought in at right before the deadline. He's a $9.5 million defenseman that never looked like a $9.5 million defenseman in Chicago. And they brought him into, Florida, and maybe for this type of performance in a Game 7, he was extremely aggressive. So when you look at the way that the game was played, I would have thought that at one point the Leafs would have said, okay, we're going to try to be extremely defensive here. We're going to chip pucks in the neutral zone. We're going to get it away from our net. But they didn't do that, and they kept coming back. 15 turnovers in the game. 15 turnovers, giveaways, right? The Florida Panthers only had 5 giveaways. It was a complete mishandling of the game because Florida put so much pressure and the Toronto Maple Leafs couldn't respond to it.
And Marty, if this is the end of the so-called Core 4 era, weirdly, it seems appropriate, doesn't it? Like an era where there was so much promise, and yet each and every single time the fan base was disappointed. I mean, are you shocked at the end that 4 guys with that much talent couldn't get more done for this team?
Yeah, I'm shocked because, look, in Game 6, you played a much better game overall. And Matthews comes up with the big 1-0 goal on the play from Marner. And I'm thinking, okay, like that's going to give him the confidence to go into a Game 7 and do the exact same thing. But when you look at the numbers in Game 7, the core 4, Matthews, Marner, Nylander, Tavares, they only had 7 shots on goal. They probably needed 15 to 20 shots on goal to be able to go out and make a difference. Nobody had more than 2 shots. Marner had 2. And Marner really only had 3 shots on goal in his last 5 games. After scoring the game-winning goal in Game 2, only 3 shots on goal over the next 5 games. I think that's obviously a very, very big disappointment. The scoring chances in this game came from Scott Lawton on a breakaway, Steven Lorentz on a breakaway, Pat Chiaretti in front, Domi scores. Like, you needed your main guys to step up, and I get it. You may say, well, Barkov and Tkachuk didn't step up for Florida. Yeah, I get that, but Marchand did, and Reinhart scored, and those guys are going to be stepping up, and Florida maybe is built a little differently than Toronto. Toronto needs their top guys to be their best players to go out there and win, and 7 shots in the Game 7 for all 4 of them, not going to be good enough. It's not going to create enough scoring chances, and you're not going to get the results. So that was the biggest difference to me, not being able to rely on those guys to get you the offense you needed in both Game 5 and Game 7.
And yet what's really strange, Marty, is this was the most successful season for the Toronto Maple Leafs pretty much since the early 2000s. Having said that, there are probably going to be big changes coming. From what you saw in the 2 rounds of the playoffs that the Leafs played, you're watching, you played the game, you've been on teams. What did you see that was missing from this team, and what do you think they need to do for next season?
Well, again, they get beat, right, because the depth of the Florida Panthers over time they've been able to acquire. Evan Rodriguez is not a superstar, but his addition to the lineup in Game 7 made a difference for the Florida Panthers. And I think the Leafs have to kind of look at that and saying, we can't go out there and think that our top 4 guys that we are going to spend maybe $50 million on are going to make this the difference. This is not how hockey is built. Look, the Leafs could bring back Marner, Tavares, next year. They have about $25 million in cap space right now. They have $70 million already committed to next year. 8 forwards, 7 defensemen, 2 goaltenders. So, those $25 million, you could have Marner, you could have Tavares, you could have Matthew Nyes, who's an RFA signed. That probably takes the whole $25 million. But that's a decision I think the organization is going to have to make and probably go in a different direction. Look, you're going to lose Marner for nothing because he's a UFA. So maybe you're looking at trading something else to be able to get some assets back and retain Marner. But I think this is going to be a much different team going in next year. The depth has to be different. You saw that Pacioretty was able to, be a factor with this team. You need a little bit more of a secondary scoring, somebody to help. Look at what the Oilers are doing right now. It's not just McDavid and Draisaitl. Their secondary scoring is coming through. I think the Leafs have to do the same thing so that you can go in a Game 5 or a Game 7 and not rely on your top guys. So I think that's the biggest thing and the change for next year. You got to be able to build more of your middle 6, and we'll see what happens with Marner, Tavares moving forward.
And in the words of Brad Treliving, maybe more guys with a little snot. I don't know. We'll see. Marty, here's the deal. At least we have the Oilers. Exactly. At least we have the Oilers. And Marty's going to be back on Monday night's edition of the show to preview the Western Conference Final between Edmonton and Dallas. That'll be on Monday night's show, getting ready for the first game of that series on Wednesday.